You've been trained to spot physical hazards, falls, electricity, equipment failures, but there's one category of risk nobody trained you to see.
You can see it physically, how they're carrying it physiologically, right? Something's not right today.
Today, Mark Veldkamp tells us how to recognize the signs that you or someone on your crew is struggling before it becomes a crisis, and what you can do about it. Because mental state isn't separate from safety, it is safety.
There's a whole lot of signs that somebody was not okay long before an incident happened.
This is the WorkReady Podcast. So Mark, most incidents do not come out of nowhere. The signals were there. We just didn't know how to read them. In your experience, how often were the warning signs visible beforehand, and what did they actually look like?
It didn't just happen, right? When there's an incident, when somebody's having a mental health crisis, there's signs that something was going on. And I think in the workplace, especially in these high stress environments, right? The work is hard and there's long days, right? There's signs that there are days that are really difficult, but there's a difference between a hard day and someone who's truly struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, most of these things that compound come from a lot of different directions. It could be, relationally, it could be from a family perspective, it could be someone who's sick, it could be financial stress. What are some of the things that you've experienced that lead to that compounding?
Yeah. So I like to look at it from a perspective, and I'll do this in my practice when I work with clients, is risk and protective factors, right? So risks being things like isolation, substance use, lack of support, lack of identity outside of work, right? So work being the sole identity. And protective factors are close relationships at work, outside of work, family, a sense of purpose that could come from work, but also outside of work as well. So I think with the lack of protective, things that support us, we have concerns, right? Without those.
And what are some of those early indicators that someone on a crew may be struggling? And it's not the obvious ones, it's the ones that most people look at and they just kind of rationalize away.
I like to think of it as like you can see it, right? You can experience it with somebody who's increased in agitation, right? Maybe we had a hard day, a long day, but they're not able to turn it off, right? So you can see it physically. So if I see a client in my practice, I can kind of tell when they're coming in, something's not right today, right? How they're carrying it physiologically, right? And, in these settings, you might have somebody who's it also might come through anger or agitation or kind of extreme reactions.
Yeah. And again, going back to those signs, like, sometimes people working on a crew, they may be spending more time on a day-to-day basis with the people that they work with in their own families.
Yeah.
And so you start to identify different behaviors, reactions to certain things. When somebody does see a coworker and, somebody on their crew, just their behavior has changed. Like, what are the best things that they can do to ask questions or to be curious?
Yeah. And I like that point. Like, there's a good chance they're spending more time, especially in a work week, with their coworkers, right, than their family or outside of work, right? So, good chance that they know their coworker very well, right? And one of the things that's really important to remember is that these conversations can be low stakes, right? So, and also it's helpful to know who's the best person to have a conversation with the employee who may be in distress or concern, right? So maybe there's a close friend on the team who can actually talk to them side by side and say, hey, I noticed this. So it doesn't come from a place of criticism. It comes from a place of observation, of concern, right? And I think you're not going to fail, no matter what language you use, as long as you're coming from that place, right? So I think people are afraid because if I say the wrong thing, that means they're going to do something, or I'm going to upset them, or they won't tell me, right? So I think it's also how you express it, right? That you're not critical, that you're really concerned because you see them maybe acting differently than they usually are, right? Or saying odd things or stress, which could be a reaction to difficulty.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, I think there's a lot of fear of what the repercussions are going to be when you do ask those questions, because maybe
Mhm.
somebody feels agitated to start out with, and it's like, man, I just want to keep my distance with this person. But the
Yeah,
thing that they may really need is just somebody to lean into them. How does somebody
sure,
assess that situation? And you gave a suggestion of like how to ask that
mm,
question based on the
sure,
observation. But what are some other tactics that people can use?
sure. I like the idea of like a side by side conversation, right? So less formal when you're starting out, right? So it doesn't have to be coming into somebody's office, but a coworker who can say, "Hey, how's it going?" Right? This has been a hard day. How you doing? Even those simple check-ins, right? Or even how a lead manages, after a long day, right? And if it's even, hey, let's get some coffee together, guys, or something to just kind of turn it down, right? And I think the other thing that's really important is preserving a person's dignity, right? So to not make them feel like they're in trouble, right? But if they need to be take a moment aside, right, or wait till everybody's left the site, right, to have a conversation, take a walk with them, right? So it's really, I think we get worried about what we say, but it's really just it's turning the knob down also for ourselves when we have those conversations as well.
And we've focused so far in this conversation on thinking about somebody else on the crew, but this might actually be the person who's listening to this conversation who's struggling. And so in the trades, pushing through is kind of part of that culture. It's that just you grit it out. Where does that stop being a strength and start to become a safety risk?
Yeah. And I think it is a strength, right? Because you have to be able to focus for hours on end. You have to get the job done, right? But it also can, I think the flip side of it is it creates a culture sometimes where it's not okay to uh, struggle, right? Or to be burnt, right? And you just have to grind through. We keep going. We keep going. That's the culture, and that's there for a reason, right? That is part of it, right? Sometimes that job has to get done. So that's not, there are strengths to that, right? But I think that it all comes down to leadership and understanding your people, and what's going on for them and what they may need, and that'll differ from person to person, right? So it can create a culture where saying something isn't okay as well.
There are typically a few different times over the course of the day where people huddle together. One of them is usually
Mm,
the pre-job safety brief, or it could be like what we call a tailboard, where we talk about the work
mhm,
that's going to be done during that day. So, what are some signs that a leader who is facilitating that meeting can look for in their crew? It might be body language. It might be, just
mhm.
the response in people's face when they say certain things. What are some things that people can be aware of in those group settings that
Sure.
might help understand that, hey, as a crew, we're pushing too hard, or
Yeah. Yeah.
this seems like an unreasonable task, or
Yeah.
we need to change things up.
Well, I think that's a really interesting time to assess where your crew is at, right? And looking at their body language within that, right? Are people engaging with the supervisor? Are they responding? Are they acknowledging? Are they looking down? Are they even folding their arms, shaking their heads, right? Those might be signs too that somebody is burnt, right? Or they need to reset, right? So those moments are really good also as a team, right? To check in with each other, right? It doesn't just have to be the leader, right? There's the opportunity for people to kind of talk about how they're doing, where we're at. This has been a long week, a bit of a debrief as well, right? And they don't have to be long.
And during that pre-job brief, I noticed that my teammate was just, folding their arms. They seemed disengaged. And now it's just me and that other person, and I'm walking out, and I can tell something's wrong, but I don't know what to say, what I should avoid. Like, what are some conversation starters there that somebody could
Yeah.
maybe use as cues?
I, I think a simple question of, are you okay? How's it going? Right. And, um, not, and on the flip side, to not say, I know how it is, right? Because you don't necessarily know what's going on, right?
And what should that person do if they try to engage and person's like, nothing? and they just like walk away,
I'm
and you
fine.
just get that, yeah, I'm fine. And
Uh-huh.
you just get that
Uh-huh.
one word answer.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
when you observe them out there doing the work, you're like, this person is not fine. They don't want to talk to me. Like,
Yeah.
what are the steps? You know, no one wants to be a tattletale. No one wants to
Yeah.
like you're the
Yeah. Yeah.
supervisor
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
feel like they're ratting
Sure.
someone out. But there is a time
Yeah.
where it is a safety risk if somebody's head's not in the game. So, like, what are the steps and that you would recommend for somebody to navigate that?
Yeah, I think that's this is the big challenge, right? Is people don't want to tattle. They also don't want to get somebody in trouble, right? On the flip side, the person who may be in distress really may not reach out because there's perceived and potential consequences, right? Of saying you have a problem, and so I think that's real, right? You're at your job. This is your livelihood, right? If there's anything, and I think in a lot of organizations, especially, first responder organizations, if there's some signs that maybe things aren't going okay, or there might be a mental health problem, well, that might mean, oh, am I going to be able to do my job, right? So I also think if they're not able and there's signs, or if they're really agitated and they're making safety mistakes, it may be time to, start to enlist like the lead a little bit. I don't know how to, I'm concerned, right? And I don't know how to have a conversation with this person. They kind of blew me off, right? And it's clear, I'm worried. I'm worried about our crew right now, because if we make it's high stakes if we make a mistake, right? So that's something that, or other peers, right? At that point, right? Is it a leadership issue, or is there somebody who's better to have a conversation with the person, right? I think makes a big difference. It doesn't always have to be the manager or leader to do the conversation. If there's other peers who can, if there's one person seeing, there's probably everybody else is experiencing that as well.
And in these type of environments, I talk to frontline workers all the time, and they tell
Mm-hmm.
me, "Hey, I'm trained on how to perform the job technically. I have all the OSHA
Mm-hmm.
training. Like I have
Uh-huh.
all that stuff,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
nobody ever taught me about crew dynamics. Nobody has talked to me about like how to actually work in these type of situations and to manage them. And it's a huge
Mm.
part. I mean, this impacts communication and it impacts safety.
Mm-hmm.
Those risks can be just from day-to-day stuff, but it could even be a crew that goes through a critical incident. And so maybe there's, an injury or a serious injury or fatality that happens on that crew or on the job, or, you're a first responder going to a scene and you're taking in the situation, the gravity of that. If somebody is part of a crew that does experience a serious injury, fatality, or like a critical near miss, what's happening to them psychologically? And what do we know they're going through mentally, and what type of support needs to happen in those situations?
The first thing is fear, right? That they're afraid, right? And then we can get into like, if let's use a fatality or an serious injury, right? And as an example, everybody there wants to get home at night, right, and see their family, right? And so to have that experience, have that happen on site, it becomes this could happen to me, right? It's very scary. And then there's potential, all the loss involved in that, right? Or even if they witnessed, they could be traumatized just by witnessing that experience, right? If they're a responder. So this becomes then not just the incident, we responded to it, we're investigating it, but now we need to, what's going on with our people as a result of that, right? Because they are going to be struggling, and not everybody will develop mental health symptoms, right? And kind of coming back to what I said earlier about the risk and protective factors, a lot of that, it helps us if we have a lot of protective factors or support, we may have a better recovery, right? So what we do know is that, exposure to any traumatic event increases our risk of mental health disorders, just as a simple statement. However, intervention, the sooner the intervention, the less likely those symptoms are prolonged as well. Okay.
Mark, we oftentimes talk about, and it's most obvious, the first-hand trauma when somebody experiences something firsthand. They're the first on the scene, or they're on the crew that had an injury. But what about the secondary trauma? How is that something that we should think about and identify and then support those people?
Sure. So I like to look at this as almost like a bit of a visual of like if you have the people who are first exposed, right? The first responders. So your intervention, right away with those folks because they saw it, they witnessed it, right? But then you have a layer of the organization. Maybe they weren't there, or they hear about it, right? Or they're coming in after the fact. So they're both really first responders, right? But as you go out, there's layers of the impact of an event, right? So within an organization, then it might be the staff who are backing up, right? Or the supervisors, right? Because they're managing the incident, the front line, the foreman, right? And it's very interesting in a community, right? If this is a critical incident, that there's beyond that, right? Then you have families of those impacted, right? If there's a loss in the workforce, who are those folks, and how does the organization respond? So we can incur trauma, obviously, as you said, from being exposed directly to it, but also from the witnessing or incurring emotional labor as a result of witnessing or hearing about an event. And sometimes even things, in the news can trigger that response. I had one situation that I had been part of and worked on, and a critical incident, and I hadn't thought about it in 10 years, and it came up in the news, and I remember having a very physiological reaction to that. And so that's why when you look at the incident, it's not just those who were there, but those who are, heard about it within your organization.
Absolutely, because I think about that, like, maybe you're an organization of 5,000 people,
Uh-huh.
and, John and Dave worked
Uh-huh.
together for 20 years. Dave moved to
Uh-huh.
a different part of the organization, and then John gets injured.
Sure.
But those 2
Yeah.
were super tight for years, and then,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
they there's no way to identify the
Mm-hmm.
secondary impact,
Yeah. Yeah.
within the
Yeah.
organization. So, broadly speaking, yeah, what are some additional things that organizations can do to just be sensitive to, those connection points that they may not even realize, those
Yeah.
who experiences secondary trauma?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that also can come down to communication, like more the broader communication to the organization, right? Probably everybody knows about the event, right? And to have when in the communication out to the organization, out to the company, uh, it, we're aware of this, right? To acknowledge it can, so you can have that direct intervention with the folks who are there, right? You need that, but also to the broader community, because you don't know, right? You don't know who it impacts or how it impacts them. To even just simply say we have resources, right? And even if they're not many, right? To just name that so that the folks see from a communication standpoint that this is, this they know that this happened and they're acknowledging it. Because I think that's the other part, is that these incidents happen. Everybody knows it happened. There are people who are affected, but it feels like, well, why didn't they? They seems like they did nothing, right? So also the communication can be really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's why, at the organizational level, it's so important that you have a system in place. I mean, every
Hmm.
organization, when they meet in person, they say, "Here's where all the emergency exits are. Here's where the AEDs are. Here's where the
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
fire
Yeah.
extinguishers."
Yeah.
They have those plans, but again, when it comes to the mental health support, we should probably have a similar type of plan laid out so that it can be like, if this happens, these are the steps that we take. As a safety leader, you have more risks to cover than hours in the day. That's where Vamosity comes in. We give you one platform to scale your impact, delivering expert curated safety campaigns on everything from slips, trips, and falls to heat stress and soft tissue injury prevention. You'll reach every crew through the channels they already use, while gaining data insights to guide smarter prevention. With Vamasi, you can boost awareness, prevent serious incidents, and keep your workforce ready for the job. Scan the QR code or visit vamasi.com to learn how leading utilities are cutting injuries by 50%. So another situation that we hear, unfortunately, fairly frequent is threats from the public. And so somebody's
Mm,
out turning off, somebody's gas or electric, and somebody comes at them with a gun or threatens them. That's a whole different type of trauma that people
yeah.
encounter. And once again, there aren't systems to necessarily support somebody through that, but I mean that can be a pretty scary situation
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
could potentially be catastrophic. So, what are
Yeah.
some things that leaders can think of in terms of supporting their teams when it comes to those
Mm,
external threats?
yeah. And in that, I think it they really need to have a formal threat assessment program, right? So that's a little bit different than what we're talking about in terms of like the trauma response, right? This is really like those are legitimate threats to your employees, right? So it's having and there's crossover in these teams, right? Because you need your risk management arm, your security arm, your HR, your legal team, right? To, disability services, right? If somebody's having a mental health issue, right? But these teams, a threat assessment, behavioral threat assessment, management team, to manage those threats and, if needed, escalate them to outside law enforcement, right? And they need to have connection to law enforcement as well, and have mental health professionals within those teams to provide input around what may be going on, and also how do we get this person the support they need immediately, right? Because they're just doing their job and it's a threat. And one thing that I like this definition of just trauma is an incident that overwhelms our capacity to cope. I think it was Dr. Dan Siegel who said that. Another one is something that impacts our nervous system and again overwhelms our nervous system's ability to respond, which is Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who's a psychologist. So I think just this idea that it's something that unexpected, right? You could be trained, to go out to do your job as a first responder or, someone in the trades, right? You do that every day, but it's something that you're not prepared for that causes that overwhelms our capacity to cope. And that's something to, yeah, go ahead.
I think we need to double click on that
Yeah.
because a
Yeah.
lot of times people
Yeah.
don't think about the nervous
Yeah.
system playing a
Yeah.
role
Yeah.
in our ability
Yeah.
to manage
Yes.
this. But
Yeah.
can you
Yeah.
expand on that? Because I think
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
really key
Yeah.
component here.
When you think about people's reactivity at work, right, or the agitation, it's their nervous system reacting, right? It's them, not being able to manage whatever's going on. And that might not be even, they're not, might be cognizant of it or not able to understand what's happening. It's that they might have so much input that it's spilling out, right? That it's showing up at work, right? And the ways they're responding to people or the ways they're talking and communicating. So that is a huge component of when we're concerned about folks. It's that there's impulsivity, reactivity, right? And that might be their nervous system being overwhelmed, right? Yeah.
And yeah, I'm really glad we're talking about this because the episode right before this, I'd encourage people to listen to. It's Rich Ganley. He's talking about what we call the recharge rooms. These are meant originally for first responders, and it's all focused on trying to balance out the nervous system in recovery. And so it's that whole idea that you've got the parasympathetic, which is rest and digest. You've got the sympathetic side of the nervous system, which is like the fight or flight. And when we experience a trauma, and you can definitely correct me if I'm misspeaking here, but when we experience a trauma, we tend to have that heightened state of fight or flight, and our nervous system can get stuck in that. I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to add there, but I think it's an understated, underappreciated component of the stress reaction,
Yeah.
and it can
Yeah.
be really effective
Yeah.
at helping someone.
This concept, I think it's been mentioned on previous episodes of mindfulness, right? And how what that really is being present, right, with whatever's going on. But so, for example, that the recharge room, right, allowing yourself to be, right? To slow down, right? So your body can catch up with what's happening, right? The incident that just happened, to slow down so you can, in that case, maybe even have to go back to it, right? But if we cannot turn it off, we're going to feel anxious, we're going to feel distress, and that's our body's way of telling us, uh, you need to turn it off, right? So, I'm a big fan of those types of exercises, whether it's like grounding out, right? Breathing 30 seconds, right? Just to like sit there and notice your body, right? Whatever it is that's going on, is something that, we really need, right? And then these groups, it's not in the training, right? It's not in the manual, right? And it's not in the safety checklist. But it goes a long way to even continuing to be able to do that work in a healthy way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I say this every episode, and people are probably like, "Kevin, you say this every single episode," but I can't emphasize enough that these are workforce athletes. Like, the way that they're pushing their
Uh,
bodies on a day-to-day basis
uh-huh.
is 2 to 3 times
Mm.
the amount of time per day physically that a typical athlete
Uh,
would
yeah.
perform.
Yeah.
0 off
Yeah.
seasons.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, like, being able to take care of the body and have that
Yeah.
time to,
Mm.
support that recovery is so important because,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't, it's just like the body has a certain level of capacity, and when you constantly are overloading it, its ability to handle these additional stresses just becomes less, and it's not a sign of
Mm-hmm.
weakness, it's physiologically what the
Yeah.
body's
Yeah.
capable of, and,
Yeah.
what are
Yeah.
your thoughts around that, like, this whole,
Uh,
industrial athlete concept and the way that people can leverage those principles to support themselves?
and I think that's a great way to look at it. And I know you have like a experience working with high performing athletes, and to transition to folks who are working. There's no break, right? There are no off seasons, right? And so, how do you incorporate these principles into your day to day, right? And it's not fluffy stuff, right? It's really stuff to help you be able to do your job, be able to also go home at night and feel calm around your family, right? And do whatever it is you want to be doing outside of work, right? So, and it doesn't have to be a huge lift, right? You don't necessarily, if you don't have time, doing a brief like breathing exercises, a slow down or a recharge room or things like that can help you. They go a long ways, right? And then when you're off, to be off, right? To not be hooked into work, and that's hard for many of us, right? But when you're working that much, that's already taking up a lot of mental space for you. How do you just totally separate from that? Because it's you have to come out of it at some point.
Mark, I wanna go through some myth busting here, some rapid fire questions because, I think these are things that people I've heard them either say, or I know that people listening may have thought these, and so I'd love to just get your perspective on it. So
Sure.
myth number 1 is mental health is personal, it's not the company's role. So what would you say to a leader who genuinely believes that?
I would argue it's a safety issue, right? And I would I would say that it's like any other part, injury or body part, that you need healthy workers, and the brain is part of the body, right? And so, and just the financial, for folks who are, I think this is important. There's a real cost to not having your workforce healthy, right? If you talk about a physical injury, the cost of having somebody out, right? If you have somebody who has to go on leave for mental health, there's a cost to that, right? Or if they burn out and they don't leave, right? There's a cost because they're phoning it in. They're not able to do their job, right? So, and it makes your teams perform better if folks are able to dial in there, especially with this work.
Myth number 2, if someone needs help, they will ask for it. Why is this assumption so often wrong, and what does it cost organizations that rely on that type of a mindset?
I think that's a huge myth, right? Especially in the workforce, uh, because of the dynamics. This is their livelihood. Or what we talked about is the tough it out mentality, right? You suck it up and keep going. And if you show, quote, weakness by saying you need help, that's not acceptable, right? And so it's really unlikely, right, for an employee to go to a supervisor, right, about a concern, because there's good reason to feel worried, right? And so that's why also peer-to-peer support, these types of conversations are really important. So it's unlikely that somebody's going to come out and say, I'm depressed or I'm struggling. It's very unlikely given the dynamics, especially at the workplace.
Myth number 3 is bringing it up might make things worse. What actually happens when you address it early rather than just waiting and hoping it just resolves on its own?
And that is it's such a common myth, right? Is this idea that I'll make it worse, right, if I bring it up, right? And or I've heard, if I talk about suicide or worry about that, it will cause it, and nothing could be further from the truth, right? Because just the very nature of feeling distress, having a mental health diagnosis, or just symptom is isolating, right? So by someone asking, it actually allows, or even sharing, maybe they've had a difficult time before, that actually allows an opening versus making it worse, right? And names it for a person.
Expanding on that, would you say that a majority of the time, like just addressing it and somebody actually asking someone the question, the person on the receiving end, they actually feel a lot of relief that they were just able to
Yeah.
get it off their chest?
Yeah, yes, I would say that it's, more likely. Now there may be shame associated with it, but like we talked about earlier, how you ask, right? A check-in, a low stakes conversation, right? A caring response. Hey, let's go grab dinner, or let's grab something to eat, right? Just to show that person cares, right? So it's like, it's pulling them out of that isolation, right? Because it's all internal, right? And then we have thoughts that tell us, right, that it's worse, maybe too, right? That we can internalize. So.
When it comes to a supervisor, what is one skill or tool that they should have in their toolbox when it comes to the mental health of their crews?
One thing is, they don't have to be the expert, right? They don't have to feel like they have to be the counselor. You are not, right? That's not your job, right? But your job is, you do have a responsibility as a leader, right, to the folks, and being able to simply have a conversation and not worry that you're going to cause more problems, right? And come from a caring perspective. So just very simple language, right? And not accusatory language, supportive language is helpful.
One of our other podcast interviews was John Harrison. He talked about leadership, and he said one of the most important characteristics of a leader is being approachable. And when you're approachable, it changes the dynamic of the relationship between, the supervisor, teammates. What would you say about that characteristic of approachability playing a role in mental health of a team?
Yeah. There has to be an ability for folks to talk with supervisors. I like that word, approachable, right? That not, again, they don't have to be the counselor, right? It's just that they can talk with them, they can resolve issues, they can have direct conversations. That there's a trust and safety, right? And just psychologically, that they are able to talk about issues that are going on the team, or whether that's actual specific workplace issues without a strong reaction or blame. Someone who's actually willing to take a broad or a bird's eye view of what's going on and not make assumptions is really important, and especially in light of these conversations around mental health.
You've mentioned psychological safety a few times. We've defined it in different interviews, but how would you define psychological safety?
Uh, the ability, especially in the context of work, for folks to feel that they can work without just toxicity or stress. This ability to feel that they can go and do their job, um, and um, and be able to do it in a way that and also grow, right? That they feel comfortable bringing ideas or um, you know communicating needs, especially in these high stakes environments. Being able to feel safe, because sometimes you do have to have direct conversation. We need this, we need that, right? And to feel that others trust that is really for the betterment of the team and the job as well. So
And what can a
sure.
leader do just to be thoughtful about building psychological safety on a crew?
I think it comes with this idea of if we've had a hard week, how do we regroup, right? So there could be moments, there could be tough times or tough conversations. Is it that we get some food at the end of the week together, right? We grab lunch on Friday or something, right? So that uh, we turn the dial down, right? That there's time for folks to even have fun, to keep it light, because the work could be really serious and or at times traumatic, given what they might be exposed to, right? Whether that's they're the first responder in an incident and there is a fatality, there is something, right? And so a leader who actually it doesn't have to be hard. I think these softer kind of like we're gonna get some pizza, we're gonna get the crew together, right? There's the formal ways of debriefing, but also just that time where people have the opportunity to just be people, to chill, right? Within that structure, right? I know that they're going all day, but what does that look like after the workday at the end, right? Even if it's a moment to gather the group, where are we at today? Yeah.
And a lot of crews, they like to poke fun at each other, they like to tease,
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
I think that,
Uh-huh.
in some ways, that is a sign of affection towards
Uh-huh.
each other,
Uh-huh.
but
Uh-huh.
with being able to do that, but also maintaining a level of psychological safety so that people are not,
Uh-huh.
constantly,
Yeah.
scared of being ridiculed. What are
Yeah.
some things that crew members can do to build,
Yeah.
psychological safety
Yeah.
amongst each other on
Yeah.
the cruise?
Yeah. And yeah, that stuff is normal, right? A team that can kind of like, poke fun and, I think there's a line there where it becomes, where someone's being toxic or critical, right? Hurtful, right? And you can see it. People experience it, right? Oh, this is no longer fun, right? This person is, right? And so as a team, it's also like, recognize it's a lot of this recognizing what are the what's going on with my teammate, right? What is them probably best, right? You're around them all the time. What do they need, uh, you know, at work, or do they just need a break, right? Like, oh, this, he just needs to chill out for a bit on his own. That's normal. That's part of the day. Like recognizing those things within your team, because you are at work. You do need to have time. These aren't your family members, right? Sometimes you're very close. Sometimes you may not, not always like the people so much, right? So being able to recognize that it's okay, right? To also, um, take a break by yourself, right? It doesn't mean that there's something necessarily wrong. Some people need that, right? That we're built a little differently around, that social battery. So,
One final question here. What common mistakes do leaders make in the immediate aftermath of a critical incident?
yeah. Uh, I a couple of things that really stick out to me is that not following up, right? So this incident happens and not keeping the focus on the employees, right, that are responding to the incident, and knowing that even these small check-ins, and keep even putting it on a calendar. Like, I need to follow up with this person who is especially, if it's a loss of a coworker, or they're going to be impacted for a while, right? That might have been their you know partner for years, right? And so um, one common thing I hear from employees is that it seems they've forgotten that this happened, right? It seems to have forgotten that so-and-so has passed away and we're just moving on business as usual, or they've moved into investigative mode and, they've forgotten that we were all part of this, right? So I think that part is really important to instill, is that follow-up needs to happen. You can't just, that is something that I've experienced too in my work as in organizations where I've been part of an incident and we just had to keep churning, in this case, with crisis cases, right? So for others, it's like going back to the job and not having any follow-up increases that risk.
And what are the implications of not talking about it? Like you said, a critical incident may have happened and there's an active investigation. So people are, worried about even talking about it. And then everyone just goes into suppression mode. Like what impact can that have on a crew?
I think that there's a lot of impact in terms of their their feeling of psychological safety, right? Because they don't feel necessarily safe to talk about it or like to have a reaction because, oh, this could be part of the investigation, or I'm already talking to an investigator. And yes, all that has to happen. It does, right? But not being able to have a moment to, that's why these peer groups are really, really helpful, right? The follow-up, because then you get into unaddressed symptoms, potentially people having mental health issues as a result of their exposure, because there's been no follow-up, no debrief, intervention, and they suffer in isolation without any intervention.
Mark, for the workforce athletes listening, maybe they're driving home or just finishing a shift. If they only remember three things from this conversation about recognizing risk and taking care of the people on their crews, what should those three things be?
So, number one, you can have conversations about mental health. It doesn't even have to be called that, right? But you can have conversations, right? Leadership can do this. It is possible. And organizations that invest in the mental health and well-being of their employees are going to reduce costs. They're going to retain employees. It is really, really important, and it's just as important in any other injury, and maybe more important because it could cause also safety issues, right? So it really is possible, and it requires investment, and it requires a culture of care from the organization. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. This has been really helpful to talk through, I think, some really practical things that people encounter on a day-to-day basis, but it's something that is not necessarily talked about day to day on crews and
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
workplace. So, we spend a lot of time training people to recognize external hazards, but some of the most common risks are internal in how someone is
Mm.
thinking, what they are carrying into the job on a day-to-day basis, whether the people around them feel safe enough to say something when something is wrong. If we ignore that, we're missing a significant part of the safety equation. Physical readiness matters, recovery matters, psychological safety matters just as much, and these are all part of the same system. And like we talked about, it's even at that nervous system level. So, Mark, what you help organizations do is see what was previously invisible and respond in a way that actually protects people, and that's where the future of workforce safety is going. So, thank you for being here. And I just want to highlight, if you want to learn more about Mark's work in threat assessment, trauma response, and building psychologically safe organizations, Mark, your website is markveldkamp.com. Do you want to share a little bit more about how people can reach out to you?
Yeah, you can also email me. That's on the website, mark@veldkampco.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. I share a lot of insights into workplace trauma is kind of the area that I focus in now. And so if folks are on LinkedIn, you can follow along there. Feel free to reach out with any questions. I do a lot of training for organizations, especially first responder organizations. This is, exciting area. There's not there's a lot of talk about it, but not a lot of folks doing the work. And I'm excited to talk with you, Kevin, about this. And it really aligns with what I'm trying to do, just as a clinician, trying to bring that knowledge into the workforce as well. So
Well, awesome. It was so great to have you
yeah,
on the WorkReady
yeah,
podcast. And for those listening, if this changed how you think about safety and the people around you, make sure to share it with a supervisor or crew lead. Also, make sure to subscribe to the WorkReady podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Just ensures that you'll catch these episodes each week. And until next time, take care of yourself, take care of your people, and stay work ready.